Record. Okay, fine. Good morning, everybody. I want to dedicate this morning's shiur to the memory of Gittel Bat Yitzchak Isaac Karnofsky, whose yortzeit is today, and that is Rose's mother. Is that right, Rose? That is Rose's mother. And her neshama should have an aliyah from our learning today. And also want to dedicate the learning for a refuah shlema for Susan Olsborough, who had surgery a couple of days ago. And her name is, if I'm not mistaken, Bracha Bat Leah. So we all wish Susan a refuah shlema and hope to have her back with us as soon as possible. Right, we're going to go back into our Gemarah today. Thanks to Marcel, we did a tangent last week, and we never even opened our Gemarah. It was very useful. I'm not criticizing Marcel. It was a great question, and it led me into some good research. So I was very, very pleased with that. To date, just as a matter of interest, to date, 53 people have viewed the shiur on Hatarat Nadarim that we did last week. So that's been quite popular. And of course, that led us into the first part of Kol Nidre that we did on Sunday. And we'll carry on, Bezrat Hashem, on Sunday with that. But today, we need to get back into our Gemarah. Otherwise, we're not going to finish in time for Leon's 120th birthday. And we must do that. So we are on page 6b. We are towards the top if you're in the Vilna edition or the Art Scroll edition, and if you're in the Steinsaltz, then you will be on my screen when I find it. Hopefully, you should be able to see. Can you see the Koren Talmud on my screen? Yeah, okay, fine. So we just need to find page 6b, which I think is around about page 30 or something, if I'm not mistaken.
31, Johnny.
31, thank you.
31.
Thank you, Johnny. Right, 31. Yes, here we are. Right, so let's just go back a little bit. And we had, if you remember, we had this mnemonic for 8 different rabbis who had something to say about the concept of compromise in halakha. That's what our subject is. We're discussing, at the moment, we're discussing the idea of whether it's a good thing or not a good thing to make compromise. And as you know, we've had various different opinions that have said compromise is a good thing, opinions that said compromise is not a good thing, and actually anybody who does a compromise should be cursed, and anybody who blesses a compromiser is a blasphemer. We have had even such a strong opinion as that. That's over here where I'm pointing on my pointer here, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. He was the one that said, Asur livtzoah. It's forbidden to make a compromise. Anybody that does do a compromise, he's talking about judges, not litigants. He's saying that he doesn't say that it's not a good thing for litigants to do a compromise. What he does say is that for judges, your job is to judge according to halakha. Your job is not to compromise, and if you do compromise, then you're a sinner, etc. So that was Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And then we, if you recall, he said, Yikov hadin et ahar. The judgment has to go make a pierce, has to make a hole through the mountain. In other words, the judgment has to be the main thing. And then we made the contrast. We spoke about the contrast between Moshe, who was Yikov hadin et ahar. Moshe was the one who was halakha, straight halakha, no messing around. And Aharon was the one who was a little bit gamish, there's a word in Hebrew, gamish, which means flexible. So he was a bit flexible, Aaron, and he was the one that was Ohev Shalom v'Rodef Shalom. He was the one that was trying to make compromises with people to try and bring peace. And then we moved on to Rabbi Eliezer, and he was the one that brought out this very, very interesting discussion that we had about mitzvah haba'a ba'aveira, a mitzvah that came by doing an aveira. So he gave us the example, somebody who stole wheat and then made it into bread and then wanted to separate challah and wanted to make the bracha on separating challah. Well, of course, this was a stolen wheat, and we had a whole discussion about that, and we then had a whole discussion about what you do with how you actually acquire something and changing changing the form of something changes its status. We spoke about that. And then I think this is where we got up to. I think we got up to here, Rabbi Meir. I don't think that we've done this. So that's where we're going to go from here. I don't remember doing this. If when we start it, you've done it, then let me know. But we're going to do it anyway. So we're over here, Rabbi Meir Omer. Okay, Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir says, and by the way, Rabbi Meir, in our mnemonic, he's probably, but not necessarily, going to be a mem. If you remember, that mnemonic wasn't all that easy to remember. Rabbi Meir, let's see what Rabbi Meir designated by men. Yes, okay, well at least that's sensible. Rabbi Meir says, "Lo ne'emar botseya ela keneged Yehuda." This expression, botseya. Remember, we had two words for compromise. We had the word botseya, which we said was rather negative because it's used in Tehillim to mean a thief. And the rabbi, I think it was Rabbi Meir himself, who said that making a compromise is actually a negative thing because you're stealing from both sides. Neither side is getting what they think is due to them. That's the whole point about compromise. You both sides give up something. So by giving up something, as it were, you're stealing from the other side. So he was very negative about the idea of compromise, and he was the one that used the expression botseya in the first instance. The other expression which is used is pshara, you'll remember, which is the same word as mayim poshrim, lukewarm water. Is neither hot nor cold, so it's a compromise. But here we're using the expression botseya. Now, Rabbi Meir bolsters his position by bringing us a verse in the Torah which uses this expression of botseya in a very negative way. Now, David Marks is not with us today, so I can't ask him the difficult questions, but he would know this one very easily because it's a famous expression. And he brings a pasuk from, as you can see here, from Bereshit. And the pasuk is this. Let's see. I think I got this ready last week and left it open. Let me just have a look and see if I've got Bereshit out here. Here we go. Yes, here we go. Right. This is the story of Bereshit. Can you see Bereshit on my screen? No, you can't see my screen. What have you got on my screen? You can see my screen. This is the story of Joseph. No, you can't see that.
We've still got Sanhedrin on the screen.
We've still got Sanhedrin. Okay, let me try again then. Let me try and get it again. Now, what have you got? Now you've got Bereshit, okay?
That's it.
Yeah, okay. So this is the story of Joseph. Joseph had dreams. His brothers felt threatened by him and were jealous of him. So this is what happened. Leon, perhaps you were in we're in chapter 37. If you want to read it out of your Chumash, or you can read it out of the screen.
Yeah.
I would like you to go from verse 18, please.
Right. They saw him from afar.
Oh, what's happened to Leon?
To kill him. And they said to one another, look, that dreamer is coming. So now come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And we will say a wild beast devoured him. Then we shall see what will become of his dreams. Reuben heard, and he rescued him from their hand. He said, we will not strike him mortally. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, intending to rescue him from their hand, to return him to his father. And so it was when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the fine woolen tunic that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty, no water was in it. They sat to eat food. They raised their eyes and they saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, their camels bearing spices, balsam and lotus, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what gain will there be if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?
Okay,
Come,
let's stop there. Let's stop there. So that's a famous story that you're all familiar with. But how many of you will have noticed over the years when we lamed that pasuk in Bereshit, sometime sort of towards the end of the year, that we say this pasuk, verse 26 that Leon's just read out. Vayomer Yehuda el Achav, Yehuda said to his brothers, Ma betza ki naharog et achinu. What benefit is there? What gain is there if we kill our brother? You see that word betza? That is the same root as our Gemarah, which I'm now going to try and put up again. I want you to tell me if you've got it. Have you got it? Does the Gemarah come back up? No. Okay, I'll have to reshare then. Hang on. We back in the Gemarah now? Yeah. Okay. So Rabbi Meir says, Lo ne'ema botseya. This whole idea of botseya, of compromise, ela keneged Yehuda. This is stated around Judah. Shenema, and then it quotes the pasuk we've just said. Vayomer Yehuda el Achav. Yehuda said to his brothers, Ma betza ki narog et achinu. What benefit will there be if we kill our brothers? Okay, so in some ways, what Yehuda was suggesting was a compromise. The brothers wanted to kill Joseph. He himself, this is the theory, by the way, not sure that I buy it, but he himself wanted to save his life and didn't want to do any harm to Joseph. He knew that the brothers wanted to kill him, and so he didn't feel that he was able to save him completely. So he made a compromise and he said, let's not kill him, let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites, and it'll be, we'll be rid of him. And so that was a compromise. It wasn't murder, but it wasn't saving his life properly either. And so Rabbi Meir says that this botseya, we can learn out this whole idea of compromise from Yehuda. But now look what he says. Now look what he says. Now this goes against all the grains of what we are taught in our kindergarten Judaism, that our forefathers can do no wrong and they are superheroes without any faults. Because look what Rabbi Meir says. V'chol hamavarech et Yehuda. Anybody who blesses Yehuda, in other words, who says that Yehuda did the right thing here with selling Joseph to the Ishmaelites, hare zeh menaetz. There's that word again, menaetz. He's blaspheming. He's cursing God. What a thing to say about Yehuda. Yehuda, the leader of all the tribes. Rabbi Meir says that anybody who says that what Yehuda did here was a good thing, hare zeh menaetz. He is blaspheming God. Va'al zeh ne'emar, and he quotes our pasuk that we had before, that we quoted earlier on from Tehillim, ubotzea beirech nietz Hashem. Anybody who does this compromise, that's what he's bringing this to mean, is blaspheming Hashem. So Rabbi Meir is saying here that compromise is a bad thing. And we can learn that it's a bad thing from the word that Yehuda used in his attempts to sell Joseph. And anybody who says, that turns around and says, but Joseph was doing a good act here, he was trying to save his life, Rabbi Meir's not buying it at all, and he says, no, that's not the case at all. Now, if the Meforshim ask the question, what was wrong with what Yehuda did? He tried to save his life. He says, why should we kill him? Surely you should praise Yehuda for doing that. Why is that something which would be considered blaspheming God? So before I answer that question, Howard's got his hand up. Maybe he's going to answer the question for us.
No, I'm not. I'm going to complicate it. It was 2 or 3 weeks ago that you clarified that the sort of compromise that was objectionable was one that a judge took upon himself to use. You said all other compromises were acceptable.
Yes,
so
I even said that this morning.
Okay, so if it's only the compromise that a judge imposes on himself because he can't be bothered to judge the case properly, if that's the only type that's abominable, why are we so concerned about, why is Rabbi Meir so concerned about compromises between ordinary people?
So what you're asking me really is why was Yehuda not praised for making a compromise? Because we actually praise litigants who want to compromise. Rather, yes, you're absolutely right.
Or brothers who save the siblings' lives, yes.
Yeah. So it's a very good question. And I'm going to ask you, so in fact, you're not answering my question. You're actually making the question more severe.
It appears that there are compromises that are a blessing, and maybe some compromises are filled with evil. And this one that the Yehuda made was certainly one that was not what God would expect of us to do to each other. So compromise can be a two-edged sword. One part of it being wonderful because it provides two decent people with what they need. And the other one is like this one, which I agree with Rabbi Meir. I think this was despicable behavior.
Okay, that's a reasonable point of view. If I was being devil's advocate on that particular point, I would say what Rashi says. Okay, Rashi says that why is it that we, in some ways, what Rashi is saying actually supports what you're saying, Nachum, and it answers partially our question. Rashi says that the reason Rabbi Meir is unhappy with Yehuda is that Yehuda was the leader here. Yehuda was the leader of the brothers. He already had the position of strength. He might not have officially been the leader. Yaakov had not yet appointed him to be the leader. That happened on Yaakov's deathbed when he gave out the brachot in Parshat Vayechi. But nevertheless, de facto, as it were, Yehuda was the leader. He was the ringleader. And what Rashi says is that if Yehuda was powerful enough to get the brothers to come down off their position of wanting to kill Joseph, then he should have used that influence and gone further and said, this is wrong, we don't act like this towards a brother, and they should have kiboshed the entire plan. Rashi is critical, and Rashi is explaining Rebbe Meir's criticism as saying that this compromise, if you like, did not go far enough. And the compromise was that the brothers wanted to get rid of Joseph. They said, oh, look at this. I think the words, I don't want to go back to the Pasuk because it's too much of a faff changing the screen over. But the Pasuk said, and Leon read it out, he read something like, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. They wanted to get rid of him. Yehuda says the compromise is, okay, don't kill him, but get rid of him. I agree, get rid of him. Sell him down to the Ishmaelites. He'll become a slave. We'll never have anything to do with him. We'll see what becomes of his dreams. We'll achieve what you want to achieve, which is to get rid of him, but we won't kill. That's the compromise. Rashi explains Rebbe Meir's position as saying, well, if you, Yehuda, are powerful enough to influence your brothers not to kill him, you should have used that influence and that power to get them to drop this whole thing of getting rid of Yosef altogether. That's not the way you behave with brothers. So that he's critical of Yehuda for not using his power appropriately. Now let me answer Howard's question. The first question really that you should have been asking me, Howard, you asked me the second question, okay? The first question you should have been asking me is how come these brothers, these so-called paragons of virtue, these shvatim, these what we call shiftei ka, the tribes of Hashem, the sons of Jacob, these wonderful people, how on earth could it be that they would have the idea in their head in the first place to kill their brother?
Fratricidal. They're fratricidal.
They are fratricidal, but that's a terrible thing to be. So your first question should have been, how come they were fratricidal? Okay, now, the second question which you asked was, surely compromise is good between non-judges, ordinary people. Now, the answer to both of those questions is given by some of the commentators, and it goes like this. The brothers were sitting down and they see Joseph coming from afar. They see the dreamer coming. The dreamer has said dreams which have been interpreted by the brothers implicitly and their father, that their father and mother and all of them would bow down to them. You'll remember the dreams, of course. Joseph's sheaves, they had sheaves in the field, and all the brothers' sheaves bowed down to the sheaf of Joseph. And then the second dream was the sun and the moon and 11 stars all bowing down to Joseph. Even Jacob said, what? You think me and your mother are going to bow down to you? First of all, his mother was dead by then. So that was a bit of a problem, but they get around that. So Jacob is critical of Joseph for verbalizing this dream, which is interpreted by everybody as meaning that Jacob is going to bow down to Joseph. So the brothers sit down and they convene a bet din. Okay, they convene a bet din and they judge Joseph's case, and they decide that he has been guilty of what is called mored b'malchut. He has rebelled against the king. Who is the king? Jacob, their father. He is the head of the family. And Joseph is now come along and said that he, Jacob, is going to bow down to me, meaning that I am going to be the head of the family over my father's head. In other words, I'm going to depose Jacob as the head of the family. Otherwise, why would Jacob be bowing down to him in this dream? So the brothers convene a Bet Din, and they hear the case without any evidence from the litigant, obviously, and they make a decision that Joseph, is guilty of Mored b'Malchut. He is rebelled against the king. The punishment in halacha for Mored b'Malchut is the death penalty. So they decided that Joseph is guilty of a capital crime and he has to be killed.
But
So,
it's a biased court.
okay, we know that. We know that. We'll come to that in a minute.
Oh.
I knew you wouldn't be happy, Nachum. I'm also not happy. Don't shoot the messenger, please. I'm only telling you what some of the Meforshim say in answer to Howard's question, because Howard's question is a very good question. The question is, how these compromise is meant to be a good thing. The problem is that they set themselves up, Howard, as a court. They're not in this scenario, one sec, they're not in this scenario what you described as ordinary people. They are judges. And therefore, if they are judges, Rabbi Meir is then using that as an example that judges should not compromise. Rabbi Meir is not happy with Yehuda because he thinks if Yehuda should have stopped this whole shenanigans altogether, and we can invoke this as our court rather than as individuals, because there are rabbis who explain the scenario. Of course, what they're doing is whitewashing, of course. They're whitewashing this thing. What they really happened is that these brothers said exactly what it says on the can, exactly what Leon read out. We don't want this brother of ours who thinks he's going to rule over us. He's coming along with all these hoity-toity, high and mighty ideas. Let's do him in, and we'll see who's going to bow down to who. We'll show him. So that's what I think. But that's not what the whitewashing brigade do. And the whitewashers say that, yes, he was chayev mita, he was guilty of a capital crime, he had to be put to death. And actually what Yehuda did was a wonderful thing and actually saved his life. Blah, de blah. That's the answer that they would give you to your very good question, Howard. What would you like to say in reply?
What I'd like to say in response to that is when they come to execute the judgment, they don't talk in judicial terms. They talk about a dream. They don't say, we'll now execute the judgments of the court. They say, we'll see how his dreams fare when we cast him into the pit or feed him to the wild animal. So they cease to act in a judicial way by that point.
Absolutely. So I can see you're on my team. That's fine. You're on the anti-whitewash team. Yes. Have we got any pro-whitewashers? Before I come to Stanley, just be 1 second, Stanley. Have we got any pro-whitewashers who like the explanation that I just told you about Yehuda being the head of the Sanhedrin and making a judgment on Joseph's behavior al pi halacha? No, I didn't think so. Yes, Stanley.
I just interesting point because everybody knows the story, and we know the story what Joseph rectified this old behavior by saying that it was God's providence to put him in this position and bring him to Egypt. But if we're gonna continue, like whitewashing, as you said, if it was a God presidents, somehow that has to be happen.
Okay.
Is it because of God presidents, all these brothers did bad things to Joseph? Maybe they weren't so bad. Because if we, as we can see, they had pity on their fathers, they had pity on their smaller brothers. They weren't so bad people, at all.
Okay, I think that's a fair comment, Stanley. And Stanley's making a good fist of defending the situation here. But what Stanley has raised is a deep philosophical question, and I'm just going to mention it. I don't want to go into it in huge detail right now, because otherwise I think Leon's going to be about 250 before we finish the Gemarah. But it does raise a very important philosophical question. And that is the question of human beings' free choice. Because what Stanley is saying is that at the end of the day, with the benefit of hindsight, when we go to the end of Sefer Bereshit, and we see that after Joseph has died in the Parsha of Vayechi, the brothers, after Jacob has died, the brothers come to Joseph and say, please have mercy on us. They tell a white lie, and they say, before father died, he told us to tell you to have mercy on us and not to treat us badly, because they were worried that now that Jacob had died, Joseph was going to get his own back for what they did to him all those years earlier. And Joseph's reply there is, don't worry about it. It wasn't you that sent me down here. I came down here at God's providence in order to save you and all the rest of the family from famine. And you don't have to worry. I'm not going to do anything bad to you. It was God's providence, exactly as Stanley has said. But that raises the question of free choice. So we have the same question raised against Pharaoh. Why is it fair to punish Pharaoh? Because Hashem said, I'm going to show the world how powerful I am, and I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So if Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God, why did he get punished? That's not fair, right? The same questions can be leveled at the Babylonians who destroyed the first temple, we can ask the same question. God describes the Babylonians there as the rod with which he uses to strike the Israelites, and therefore, well, it was all God's doing. What's it got to do with the Babylonians? You could even go as far as to say the Nazis, they were only doing God's will. It was God's will that the Jewish people should suffer these terrible things that happened in the Holocaust. And therefore, the Nazis somebody had to do it, because that was God's will. So that raises a very, very difficult philosophical question. Howard's not happy with that, but it does raise the philosophical question. If Stanley says that this was all God's providence, so it had to happen, and therefore the brothers can't be criticized for doing so. And I used the Nazi analogy because the reaction that Howard just gave us is the reaction that everybody feels inside, and that is that of course that can't be right. And we do need, and maybe this will be the subject of a discussion on another day, we do need in our minds to be able to square the conflict between understanding that God's providence means that God runs the world, and the free choice of man to do good or evil. And the simple answer, of course, is that man does have a choice, and it didn't need to be that way. God could have found another way to get Joseph down to Egypt. God could have found another way to punish the Jewish people if that's what we needed to have at whatever point in our history we're talking about. It didn't need to be via the vehicles that were used. But the question is an interesting question, and it has deep philosophical ramifications. But I don't want to go into that any deeper than that now, because we need to at least do a little bit of Gemarah now and again. So let's go back to the Gemarah here. Rabbi Meir is not happy with Yehuda, and he says, "Hamavarech Yehuda rizeh mena'etz." Anybody who praises Yehuda for this compromise is a blasphemer, and he uses that pasuk which we quoted earlier on, which Rabbi Eliezer used in his example. Rabbi Eliezer used this pasuk, remember, that if you stole wheat and wanted to make a bracha on what you made with it, that's not a good thing to do. Ubotzea bereich, somebody who thieves, who steals and then makes a bracha, nietz Hashem. that is blaspheming Hashem. Hashem is not happy. He does not want your brachot on stolen goods. And the same pasuk is explained in a different way by Rabbi Meir to criticize Yehuda's partial compromise. Rashi's explanation of Rabbi Meir's discomfort with Yehuda is that he didn't go far enough in saving Joseph's life. Okay, so we have so far, out of our 8 rabbis, we've spoken about 3, I think. Rabbi Meir, who we know is very anti-compromise. Rabbi Eliezer, who doesn't actually tell us anything about compromise, but uses the verse that was brought before to tell us a halacha that you can't make a bracha on stolen goods. And we have the first one, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who is also very much anti-compromise. And he uses the words asur, forbidden. Now, like all good pieces of Gemarah and all good Jewish situations, we now have the complete opposite. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, who obviously is designated in our mnemonic by a shin, because he's got a shin in his name, I think, or maybe a kuf for Korcha. I don't know. Let's just have a look what he says. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, designated by shin. Yes, I'm right. Obvious, isn't it, really, that Rabbi Yehoshua should be a shin. Anyway, there we are. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says, mitzvah livtzoah. He says, not only Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, are you wrong that it's forbidden to compromise, not only are you wrong that you shouldn't do that, it's a mitzvah to do it. Can't get any further away down opposite end of the spectrum to that. So you've got Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and you've got Rabbi Meir, who both say compromise by judges, bad. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha comes along and says, no, it's a good thing. It's a mitzvah, and I'm going to prove it to you. How do you prove it? Because they've brought psukim to support their position that botseah, compromise, is a bad thing. He's now going to bring psukim, which says that compromise is a good thing. And here goes. Shene'emar. Now, I'm hoping that one or two of you, without looking into the English, might remember this, because this verse is from Zechariah chapter 8, which was the subject of the shiur that we did on Tisha B'Av about social justice. Those of you that didn't hear that shiur, it's available on YouTube. The prophecy of Zechariah. I think the title of the shiur was "Why Are We Still Fasting on Tisha B'Av?" And we spent most of that shiur discussing this chapter 8 of Zechariah, and in particular this verse that our Gemarah brings. It's amazing how often our paths, when we're learning things, intersect with one another. Who'd have thought that the shiur on Tisha B'Av would intersect so carefully with the shiur on Sanhedrin? But here we have it. He quotes this verse from Zechariah, which I think I am going to try and get for you on the screen because it's important. And I have it. Let me see if I've got it here. Sure, I got it ready. There it is. Can you see that screen, or do I need to refresh the share? No, you can't see it. Okay, let me stop that share and do a new share. How about now? Yeah, okay. So this is chapter 8 of Zechariah, and he is talking about, remember what had happened was the people had sent a message to Zechariah saying, you're now rebuilding the temple. Do we still need to fast? Because what we're fasting for the destruction of the first temple. Now you're rebuilding the second temple, so maybe we don't need to fast. And the answer basically was, oh, yes, you still need to fast, because you're not fasting for the bricks and mortar of of the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed. You're fasting because there is no social justice in Israel. We don't have the appropriate attitude to widows, orphans, poor people, strangers, the weak amongst us. We are not behaving appropriately with social justice. And so our pasuk in Zechariah that's brought here is, which verse is it? It's chapter 8, verse
16.
Thank you, verse 16. There we go. And so he says, I'll tell you. He says, so Zechariah says, I'll go and ask God whether you should fast. And God says, you're not fasting for me. I never told you to fast. He says, but I'll tell you something, says God. If you carry on making the same mistakes that you made before, makes no difference whether you fast or you don't fast. Your new project of the temple will not work out. And what is it that you've got to correct? So, verse 16, Leon.
These are the things that you should do. Speak the truth with one another, and in your gates judge with truth, justice, and peace.
Okay, let's just stop there. That's the pasuk. Let's go back to the Gemarah now. Let's go back to our Gemarah. Okay. Yeah, we got the Gemarah? Yeah, okay. So he quotes this pasuk, Emet umishpat shalom shiftu b'sharechem. He says, you should execute truth and justice and peace. Emet is truth, mishpat is judgment, shalom is peace. Shiftu, you shall judge, b'sharechem, in your gates. Now, what's b'sharechem, in your gates? What does that refer to? Any ideas what the gates refer to?
In your cities.
Yeah,
Cities?
in old cities, they had walls and they had gates.
They have walls.
And whereas in the old Roman cities, everything went on in the forum, so all the business ventures were done in the forum, the court sat in the forum. In ancient Israel, the gates of the city is where everything took place. That was like the center of the life of the city. How do we know that?
Mordechai.
Mordechai, okay. Mordechai sat at the gate.
I think Moshe went to the gates.
Boaz.
Boaz, another
Didn't
one.
Moshe go to the gates, Johnny? Moshe. He
Abraham
went to the gates to
Avinu.
tell the people. Yeah.
Moshe, well, when we were in the wilderness, we didn't have any gates. So Moshe never went into the
No, but he went to
land.
he went to the outside of the town.
He went to the outside of the camp. So, but
Camps,
Abraham Avinu, the first example, when he bought the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the cave where he buried Sarah and where he himself was buried, which is in Kiryat Arba, Hebron, in Hebron. I'm sure you've all been there at some point to the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. When Abraham bought that, he bought it for 400 pieces of silver from Ephron, Hachiti. And where did that transaction take place? At the gates of the city, because that's where everything took place, including the court. So the court took place at the gates. So this expression here, shiftu b'sharechem, is referring to court cases. So Zechariah is telling the people, this is how you've got to behave. Emet umishpat shalom, truth, justice, and peace. Now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha looks at that pasuk and says, hang on a minute, I understand emet, you've got to have truth with when you're doing judging. Mishpat is a judgment, I understand that. But shalom, where does shalom come in? Peace is something which is not brought about by a court case. The whole thing of a court case is that you have the lack of shalom. Two people cannot make shalom. They can't agree on what it is that they disagree on. And so eventually it comes to the gates of the city, to the court, and the court makes a decision. So shalom, peace, is not a word that you would associate with judges. The only people that do well out of all this thing are the lawyers, right? The cash cow lawyers that manage to, make a living out of this. Is that right, Howard? Yeah. Okay. The litigators.
I certainly hope so, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
But the shalom would come after the judgment because that's the end of the dispute.
Well, I think as an experienced lawyer, you will know that that's not the case. The loser is never happy. Yeah, Leon's agreeing with me there that you lose the case, you're not happy. You don't feel shalom. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha, I think, has got a good question, and he answers it like this. He says, "V'halo b'makom sheyesh mishpat ein shalom." Surely, he says, in a place where there is judgment, i.e., strict judgment according to the law, i.e., in brackets, no compromise, ein shalom. There, you're not going to get peace, as we've just said. No true peace, Rabbi Steinsaltz puts in there. Ubamakom sheyesh shalom, and in a place where you get shalom between the litigants. When is that? That's when the case settles before it comes to judgment. That means you've settled out of court. You've made a compromise, right? Ubamakom sheyesh shalom, in the place where there is peace, i.e., when you've come to an agreed compromise between the two sides, a mishpat, that's not a judgment, that's a compromise. So
I don't agree with that, because if you compromise, it means neither party get what they want, so you've got no shalom, you've just got two losers. Okay,
that's what Rabbi Meir says. You're a Rabbi Meir supporter. Rabbi Meir says that quite clearly. That's why Rabbi Meir uses the expression botzea, a thief. He says each side has stolen, so each side are losers. So he agrees with you, Julia. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is a glass half full man, as opposed to Rabbi Meir, who's a glass half empty. He says that if there is a compromise, then everybody goes away satisfied. And there is shalom between them. They've shaken hands, they've agreed, they don't have to go for a judgment. I can see where he's coming from. It's not adversarial, it's not confrontational. The two sides have agreed, there is shalom, but there is ein mishpat, there is no judgment. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says, Ella, rather, you must say, therefore, when Zechariah mentions emet umishpat shalom shiftu b'sharechem, ezahu mishpat, what is he talking about? What kind of mishpat is he talking about? Sheyesh bo shalom, where there is peace. Havei amar, you have to say, ze bitzua, this is a compromise. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha brings the pasuk from Zechariah to support his view that mitzvah livtzoa, the complete opposite of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yossi Aglili. He says it's a mitzvah, and I'll prove it's a mitzvah. Zechariah's pasuk proves it's a mitzvah. And I think that's a rather neat little explanation from Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. And then he says to you, and if you're not satisfied with that one, I'll bring you another proof. Two proofs is always better than one. So he, by the way, this happened to me yesterday. I was on a conference yesterday with a barrister and a solicitor on a case that I was doing, and my position was that a particular doctor had been negligent. My opposite number had said no, it wasn't negligent, and I brought a proof from the Chumash. What's the Chumash? Gray's Anatomy, right? So I brought a proof. It wasn't Gray's Anatomy, but it was a medical textbook of great repute. I brought a proof from a very famous medical textbook, which was difficult to trump. And then it just reminded me when I said what I just said. And then I said to them, I said, and if that's not good enough, I've got another proof for you. So you see, by learning Gemarah, you learn, you're not just learning Gemarah, you learn how to actually behave in your business life as well. So I brought him another proof from another text. Actually, this was from an online textbook, also of great repute. And I was able to bring the proofs. I haven't yet seen the Rebbe Meir view from my opposite number yet, but I was able to prove my points by bringing proofs from irrefutable texts. And that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is doing here. He brings Zechariah, and then he brings another proof. And he brings it from the second book of Samuel, Shmuel Bet, chapter 8, verse 15. Let's have a look what that's all about. So I will put that on the screen for you. I've got that one ready as well. There it is. Let me share that with you. Okay, you should now have chapter 8 of Samuel. Can you see that? Samuel, yeah, good. So what's all this coming about? This is when David HaMelech is the king, and he is busy fighting the Plishtim. And verse 15, here we go. And he then wins his battle against the Plishtim, and it's all very nice and hunky-dory. And verse 15, Leon.
David reigned over all of Israel. David administered justice and kindness to his entire people.
Okay, so there's our pasuk. Vayehi David oseh, and David did mishpat, judgment, tzedakah, which you translated as kindness. We would know the word tzedakah to mean charity. It's not a great translation because there's no tzedakah. It's got all sorts of different connotations. Kindness would be one of them. Charity would be one of them. Righteousness would be one of them. Mishpat tzedakah. Tzedek u'mishpat. Where do we have that? Where do we have that? Baruch atah Hashem, ha-melech ohev, tzedakah u'mishpat. We say it 3 times a day, don't we, in Shemona Esra? Tzedakah u'mishpat. Tzedakah, on the one hand, is charity. It seems to be something kindness. Mishpat, on the other hand, is judgment. So you can see what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is going to say. Let's go back to the Gemarah. What Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is saying, Vayehi David oseh mishpat u'tzedakah. David did justice and charity. He's going to be saying exactly the same as he's just said. He's brought another proof which proves his point. And he says, V'halo kol makom sheyesh mishpat, any place where there is strict justice, ein tzedakah, that's not charity, that's justice. U'tzedakah ein mishpat. And if you're giving out charity, if you're giving out kindnesses, that's not strict justice. Because if it's justice, if I justly deserve something and you give it to me, that's not charity. Charity is when you give me something that I have no real claim upon. So he says, Kol makom sheyesh mishpat ein tzedakah, u'tzedakah ein mishpat. Ela, rather, ezahu mishpat sheyesh bo tzedakah. What kind of mishpat, what kind of justice, what kind of judgment is there within which there is tzedakah, charity of some kind? Hevei omer, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, you have to say, ze bitzua. This is the act of compromise. And so he says that these 2 psukim, where we read about David HaMelech doing that which Zechariah later on, Zechariah was much later than David HaMelech, of course, that which Zechariah told the people they should be doing, David HaMelech did it. Vayehi David oseh mishpat u'tzedakah. And David HaMelech did this compromise. He encouraged and made compromises seemingly in his judgment. Because remember here, we're not talking about litigants, we're talking about judgment. Howard's not happy with that. But look at Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, what he said. Mitzvah livtzoah. And he's talking about judges. Of course it's a mitzvah for litigants to compromise. That goes without saying. The chidush, the important thing that Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is telling us is the opposite to what he says. Rabbi Eliezer Benosh Rabbi Yosef Glidi, Asor livtzoah. He says it's forbidden for a judge, and he says it's a mitzvah for a judge to compromise. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's view is that if we take a leaf out of David HaMelech's book, and we take a leaf out of Zechariah's book, then, and we were a judge, then we would be judging not according to the strict law, but according to a compromise. We would try and make a compromise. Now, the lawyers are horrified by that because that just goes against all the grain of being a litigant lawyer. Any qualified mediators here?
Yes, actually, I am.
There we go. I thought you were
Lynn and I.
Actually. I thought you were Lynn, and I didn't know about you, Howard. But there we are. I knew Lynn was a mediator. Now, Lynn would say that's a great thing. That I'm sure Lynn is on Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's team here. That it's a mitzvah to facilitate compromise. Howard's got a foot in both camps here. So he's he's a lawyer and a mediator. So we don't know about that. Which camp are you in, Howard? Are you in Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's camp?
Well,
bearing in mind, we're talking about the judge here. We're not talking about the litigants. We're talking about the judge.
I accept judges must not compromise. When they're acting alone and they're supposed to be acting judicially, it's not for them to impose a compromise. They can encourage the parties to go off and compromise. And I don't agree with Julia that they're always dissatisfied. I think you can have a win-win situation. And even if both parties are unhappy, they still are spared the misery of having the judgment handed down by the court and not knowing about it for 3 months and finding one of them is a complete loser. So I'm all in favour of compromise between the parties. But I just want to ask you something, Johnny. When you talk about mishpat v'tzedakah, in English law, you would tend to construe them as being of a similar nature. So you would talk about judgment and righteousness rather than kindness.
Yes, it depends how you translate tzedakah, of course.
Exactly.
If you translate tzedakah as righteousness, then you're right. And that's why I said that tzedakah is a difficult word to translate. Remember, Larry and Sharon, I know I'm coming to you in a minute because I want to hear the American legal version as well.
What we're saying.
But let me just answer this question of Howard's. I refer you back a couple of weeks in the Sedra to the Sedra of Shoftim, where we read a very famous pasuk, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdov. And all the commentators ask the question, why the double expression? Tzedek, tzedek. And some of them say, righteousness you must pursue in a righteous manner. In other words, you would say you have to be absolutely 100% din, right? What we said earlier, what Rabbi Eliezer said earlier, Yikov hadin et hahar. The din must pierce the mountain. Other commentators explain that double expression of tzedek, tzedek, tirdov in a completely the opposite way. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, yes, pursue justice, but have rachmanos as well. Have some tzedakah, have some kindness with it. Don't necessarily be harsh in your judgment. So you can, the word tzedakah is a difficult word to translate into English. It can have all sorts of connotations. And, you know, I suppose that's the beauty of human beings, that we all, we're a spectrum, aren't we? Some people are very din orientated, some are very staka orientated, some are in the middle, and that's human nature. Certainly many people would agree with what you have said, that judges should encourage litigants to compromise, but once they're making a judgment, they have to be judging correctly. And we'll see probably next week, actually, that the Gemarah actually speaks about this. The Gemarah does actually speak about that particular point. So I'll just stop there and go to Larry and Sharon, please.
Yes, I was going to say, as someone who spent too many years litigating in the US, particularly in civil cases, not so much in my area, criminal cases, but in several major civil cases, the ultimate mediator was the judge, him or herself, because the parties often wanted to go to someone who carried such weight because that judge or one of his colleagues may have ultimately had to render judgment. And so we often turned in these big complex cases to federal judges to try and settle the case because they had so much clout. So there can be dual roles for judges.
Can I just ask you, Larry, in the situation that you've just described, you're talking about turning to, as it were, external judges to be mediators, not the judge who is judging the case.
No, typically not, because then he or she obviously has to make the final judgment. But one of his or her colleagues, and if there are only 8 or 10 judges on that particular bench, you knew that what got back to one of the colleagues. So there was even extra impetus to try and use his or her clout and wisdom to resolve the case.
Right. Okay. So I think that what Larry has said is consistent with what Howard said. And I think it's consistent with what the Gemarah is going to say to us when we look at it next week, which is that it is, well, I don't want to spoil what the Gemarah is going to say to you next week because it'd be exciting for you not to know. But suffice it to say that I think that you will find the position of the Gemarah is consistent with that. And again, I remind you of the sophistication that we are seeing in a tractate that was written 1500 years ago and refers to halachot, which were first presented to us over 3,000 years ago. And I remind you of that again, because for me, this is a massive thing. Whenever I learned Gemarah when I was younger, it never really hit home to me just how brilliant this was. I didn't really like it, to tell you the truth, because it just all seemed so irrelevant to me. I wasn't interested in what would happen to an ox if it gored somebody or fell in a pit and all that kind of stuff that you learn in Bava Metzia and what have you. I really was not interested as a kid. I didn't have the maturity, and again, that's another one of my hobby horses, that we teach Gemarah too young to children. But it wasn't for me. I just didn't get it. It's only my later years when I started to learn Gemarah in a much more analytic way and a slower way like we're doing now that I have come to appreciate, forget the content of this, but just the sophistication of the argument and the beauty of the ability to take a position and prove your point, to take somebody else's position and take an opposite position. And both positions, to me, seem to have valid points. To me, this is the wonder of Gemarah, and I repeat it again because I think even if you are not particularly interested in the subject matter, you can certainly appreciate the sophistication and the beauty of what we're seeing. Yes, Marcel. Just a small
point. It's to do with this word betza, botzea, bitzua. In the Chumash, I notice it's spelt with a hey, and in the Gemarah with an ayin. And it's just, I'm a bit curious about that.
Where is it spelt with a hey in the?
In about Yosef.
Well, that's not what it says here. Look where my pointer is on the screen. I'm going to look in the Chumash myself in a sec. But the Gemarah here, Rabbi Meir quotes it, and the Gemarah says, "Vayoma Yehuda elechav ma betza," with an ayin.
Well, I'm sure I stand to be corrected. I stand to be corrected.
No, let's have a look.
It's on the screen.
I will have a look in my.
I jotted it down.
I will have a look in my Steinsaltz Chumash that you all kindly bought me, and have a look. Chapter 37. Chapter 37, verse 16.
37, 26, 27.
26, thank you. It's with an I in, Marcel.
Yes?
It's with an I in, not a hey.
I would have liked to have seen the one you put on the screen before. Is it the same page?
Let's have a look. I'll get it on the screen for you. No problem.
I stand to be corrected, but it's...
Maybe Chabad got it wrong. It's not unheard of.
This is error.
There we go. 26. Iron. There we are.
Is it with an iron?
It's with an iron. Yeah. It's where my pointer is now.
Bit dyslexic. I'm sorry.
Okay. No problem. No problem. There we go. Right. Okay. So let me just go back to the Gemarah here, and then we'll just wrap it up for today. Let me go back to the share screen. Sanhedrin. There we go. Right. So where are we going to stop here? And this is a good place to stop because Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha has said the opposite to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer, and he's brought two proofs. Now, the way Gemarah works is that when I bring a pasuk that proves my point, it's not good enough for you to bring a different pasuk to prove your point. That just makes us equal. What you have to do is to disprove my point. You have to take my pasuk and interpret it in a different way. So you have to come back to me and say, no, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, you've not understood that verse in Shmuel Bet about David HaMelech correctly. You've misunderstood. That's not what he means. What that verse means is something else. And that is what we're going to do next week. What we're going to do next week is we're going to hear Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi Haglili's version of what David HaMelech did as reported by Shmuel Bet. Okay, so he is going to say to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, he's in a tennis match here with Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. He's going to say, nah, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, you've not understood that correctly. This is how it should be understood. And that is what we're going to do next week. So before I wrap it up, Howard has got something to say.
Well, I just want to say, when you get a phrase like mishpat v'tzedakah, you've got to make a choice whether you're going to construe them conjointly or disjunctively. Conjunctively, or in other words, is it salt and pepper or is it salt and sodium bicarbonate? And in my view, it's salt and sodium bicarbonate, which means that it's judgment and righteousness, not kindness, because kindness is not eustem generis. Sorry about the Latin; it's not of the same kind. I'm very flattered to see Julia nodding vigorously.
Okay, well, that I think puts you firmly out of Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's team, and it puts you definitely in the legal team. I will not take a vote right now because we haven't heard Rabbi Eliezer's comeback yet. But next week maybe we'll see whose team the rest of the gang are on. Whether we're on Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's team or whether we're on Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer's team. And it will be interesting to see whether the split is along professional lines. It will be very interesting to see. Yes, Larry and Sharon. Larry and Sharon, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I'm sorry. I forgot to unmute. This time it's Sharon. You know, the concept of tzedek is such a different one from the language that we're speaking, the Christian English language that we're speaking. I always learned that tzedek was not charity and was not even quite justice. That it's tzedek is the word that embodies the proper distribution of things among society. which, well, you might almost say not social justice, but justification or righting the wrong of when distribution has become unequal where it should have been equal. And it's a sense of equilibrium, and it's a sense of a harmony that comes from that. So I just think of that as I'm reading this and looking at this conversation, and I'd love your comments, everybody, because you all have been spending your life on this.
I think that's a beautiful explanation of the word tzedek. Of course, it's not the only explanation, but I happen to like that explanation very much. It definitely pushes my buttons of social justice. So I think that is. I don't think there's anybody that would disagree that what you're describing is a positive thing, and staka is a positive thing, and you could put those two things together. But it isn't the exclusive realm of that word, and that is why we have difficulty translating. As you've said, we are all speaking English of one version or another, and you know, in Hebrew, and biblical Hebrew, even to modern Hebrew, these are different things. And of course, even in English, there are different connotations and nuances to various words. And staka is certainly a Hebrew word with various different nuances. And I think you also have to say that the nuance is dependent on the context. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha here has used the context of Mishpat to prove his point. He's using that particular context for to support his particular point. So he would have made quite a good advocate, I think. Yes, Johnny Halpern.
Just may I say the same word as tzaddik? If you describe somebody as a tzaddik, is it the same word?
It is the same root, correct. Tzaddik.
So how would you describe a tzaddik then?
Okay, well, we would describe, I think, a tzaddik as somebody who does good things, right? A tzaddik would be somebody who does good things, more good things than the average person, right? So therefore, if he is a tzaddik and he does good things, then doing staka must be a good thing to do.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Righteous.
Darren, before we finish, last thing.
Yeah, just one thought. The scales of justice have two sides, and that would be tzedek, tzedek. Equal tzedek on both sides of the scales.
And how would you translate each of those tzedeks?
That one side, the peacefulness of one side depends on the peacefulness or the wholeness of the other side if they're to be in balance. So that's, I think, some of the concept of tzedek, tzedek, or looking here, justice and shalom. If you have justice and shalom in equal measure, then you have tzedek, then you have the balance.
Okay, I need to think that through. There's a lot in there, and we need to wrap up. Let's just hold that thought, and perhaps we'll speak about that at the beginning of next week, because there's a lot in there. I suggest we all do this. I'm gonna listen to this last 5 minutes again once the recording's up, and think about what you've just said, Sharon, because I think there's a lot in there. I also want to consider the philosophical question that Stanley raised. But perhaps not in the Gemarah Shir context. Perhaps we'll do that when we come to our medical ethics course, which is going to be after the Chagim. So I'm just going to stop recording now for this.